Hello! Today we're talking about indirect object pronouns. In the last video we covered direct objects and their pronouns. Before we begin this video, please make sure you understand how direct object pronouns work, or you're gonna have a hard time understanding how indirect object pronouns work. You can watch my video or hundreds of other ones. The choice is yours. Now let's begin. You should remember from the previous video that a direct object is something or someone who directly receives an action. Just in a similar manner, the indirect object is also someone who receives an action, except it happens indirectly. I'm like the bestest professor that has ever walked the planet Earth. Allow me to explain. Before we jump to examples, I hope you remember that the direct objects answer questions what or whom, meaning that they can be things or people. Now let's take an example of Eduardo is giving flowers to Alisa. Try to identify the direct object of this sentence. You have 3 seconds. If you got it right, I'm very proud of you. So Eduardo is giving something to Alisa. Eduardo is a subject who's performing an action of giving something to Alisa. And what is it? What is he giving? That's right, flowers. Since the word flowers answers the question what, it means that it is a direct object of this sentence. So we have our subject. We have the action that the subject is performing, and we know which object directly receives the action. What else do we have in the sentence? We have Alisa, who's receiving the flowers that Eduardo gives to her. The very same action of giving something doesn't just end with flowers. It ends with Alisa receiving these flowers, which makes Alisa the indirect object of this sentence. Congrats, your brain is broken. Don't worry, we'll fix that. It is only confusing because both flowers and Alisa are objects in this example, as both of them are receivers of the same action, which is giving. Since both of them are objects, it means that the only thing that you need to always keep in mind is to remember the questions which they are supposed to answer. You already know well enough that direct objects answer questions what or whom, and indirect objects answer the questions to whom or for whom. Look at the sentence again. Even if you forget the whole asking questions logic, you need to understand that Eduardo can't give flowers to Alisa until he picks them up. So he grabs flowers and then gives them to Alisa. That's the reason why Alisa cannot be the direct object here. She's not directly receiving the action. Eduardo is giving something to someone. Let's take another example. She is talking to Jose. Pause the video and try to identify any objects in the sentence, if they exist, of course. She is the subject who's performing the action of talking to someone. And to whom does she talk to? That's right, she's talking to Jose, which makes Jose the indirect object of the sentence. If you got the same result, you are the most beautiful human ever. You may be wondering where the direct object in the sentence is. The thing is that not all sentences need to have direct objects, and that's okay. What I mean is, they are not always explicitly mentioned in a sentence. So while she is talking to Jose, the direct object would be whatever they are talking about. But since there's nothing in this sentence can answer the question what or whom, that means we don't have to worry about direct object. And therefore, there's no need to worry about direct object pronouns, because there's nothing here to replace. I hope that's clear. But let's focus on Jose, or rather the indirect object of the current sentence. Let's say I add another sentence, which is she's talking to Jose about apples. The fact that we repeat Jose twice in a row makes us look like a person with very questionable life choices. Just like in the previous video, there's a better way to sound less stupid, and that would be she's talking to him about apples. As you can see, just like with direct objects, indirect objects also have a bunch of their own pronouns, which are called indirect object pronouns. The idea remains the same. They exist to replace the indirect objects, and therefore make you sound less repetitive. It's time to learn them in Spanish. What we've got is me, te, le, nos, les. As you can see, most of the indirect object pronouns remain the same as direct object pronouns, except of course the nasty third-person singular and plural forms. That will make things easier and more confusing at the same time. Let's take a minute to discuss it. We'll start with le. I hope you remember that when it comes to direct object pronouns, for the third-person singular form we would use lo to replace masculine objects and la to replace the feminine ones. Now, when it comes to indirect object pronouns, we're going to use le for everything, whether we're talking about him, her, it, or formal you. On one hand, it makes things easier, since we won't have to worry about genders. But on the other hand, it may become more confusing, since it's not always obvious who exactly le is replacing. Let's take a couple of examples. Samuel tiró la pelota a Juan. Samuel threw the ball to whom? To Juan. So Juan is the indirect object of this sentence. I hope that's clear. Now let's try to replace Juan with the proper indirect object pronoun. What we have is Samuel le tiró la pelota. So when we know the context of the story, we know that le here would replace Juan, and it can be translated as to him. But if we don't know the beginning of the story, this same sentence, Samuel le tiró la pelota, could be translated as Samuel threw the ball to her, Samuel threw the ball to it, Samuel threw the ball to you. In order to handle this situation properly, it is very popular to actually use both le and Juan. Spanish can be weird like that. So what we have is Samuel le tiró la pelota a Juan. Basically, the idea is that as long as everyone in the room knows that we are talking about Juan, there's no need to keep his name in the sentence. Just replace it with le and that's it. But if there is a need to clarify who exactly you're talking about, it's a good practice to keep both le and Juan. You will see it all the time. I know it's weird, but it's absolutely normal, simply because it helps keeping things more precise. Otherwise, you may be asked to specify to whom exactly you threw the ball. Now let's talk about les. Les works exactly the same way as le, except in this case we are dealing with more than one person. Good talk. Alright, now it's time to clear all confusion by going over some examples. Just like in the previous video, we will cover every single indirect object pronoun that you see on the screen. Let's go. Pedro me dio el chocolate, which means Pedro gave me the chocolate. There's a chance that you're confused now, thinking, oh geez, I thought me was supposed to be a direct object pronoun, but now it's used as an indirect object pronoun. Before you start thinking how confusing Spanish is, think about the fact that in English we use the same exact pronoun me, which is me, to replace both direct and indirect objects. Always ask questions, and there won't be any confusion. In the sentence Pedro me dio el chocolate, pronoun me is an indirect object because it answers the question to whom. Pedro gave the chocolate to whom? To me. But if we have an example of, let's say, Catarina me ve, whom does Catarina see? Me. The same pronoun me can be used to say both me and to me, and that's okay, because we do the same shit in English. The next example is Te serví el café, which means I served you coffee. I served what? Coffee. Who did I serve the coffee to? To you. Coffee is a direct object and you is an indirect object. Now the fun begins. We are entering the uncharted territory of the indirect object pronoun le, so brace yourselves. The first example is Sara cocina la comida para su hijo. Sara le cocina la comida. Sara cooks the food for whom? For her son. Notice how le here replaces not only su hijo, but also the word para, which means for in Spanish. That's very important to understand and always remember. Indirect object pronouns don't only replace the indirect objects, such as su hijo. They also replace all prepositions that come with it, for example, to and for. So in this case, le replaces para su hijo. That was a masculine example of the pronoun le. Now let's do a feminine one. Carlos compré un regalo a su hermana. Carlos le compré un regalo. Carlos bought a gift for his sister. Carlos bought her a gift. Here le replaces Carlos's sister because she is the indirect object of this sentence. Keep in mind that the preposition a, just like para, is also replaced with le. Now, just like with direct objects, the third-person singular form also includes usted, or formal you. But unlike direct objects, with usted we don't have to worry about the gender of a person you're talking to. Let's look at the example of diré un secreto a usted. Le diré un secreto, which means I will tell you a secret. The first sentence says to whom you are gonna tell a secret. The second one replaces a usted with le. Usted here could be a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. Le covers everything. Now a simple example of nos. Hacen un gran favor para nosotros. Nos hacen un gran favor. I hope that makes sense. In the last couple of examples, we will cover les, which is a third-person plural pronoun. As I said before, it works just like le, except les will replace ellos, ellas, and ustedes. Let's finish this. Carmen les hace la comida todos los días, which means Carmen makes food for them every day. Good example, isn't it? Who exactly is them here? Maybe we arrived to this conversation late and all we heard was Carmen makes food for them every day. To make sure we are on the same page, we can ask, Carmen, ¿a quién haces comida todos los días? And she may reply, les hago la comida a mis niños. Les hago la comida a mis niñas. Les hago la comida a ustedes. Somos familia, cabrón. ¿Estás borracho o algo? In the last example, you realize that Carmen is your wife and she's been cooking for you and your children for 25 years. An awkward situation, I agree, but I want you to be prepared for everything. Just tell her to subscribe to my channel and you should be fine. When it comes to indirect object pronouns placement, it works the same exact way as with direct object pronouns. I don't want to spend too much time on this again, so let's use our last example as a quick brainwashing exercise. When we have only one verb in a sentence, the indirect object pronouns are placed before the verb. But when we have two verbs together, we have two options, either to place them before the first conjugated verb or after the second verb, which should be in the infinitive form. The last two examples are affirmative and negative commands. With affirmative ones, we can only place it after the verb. But with negative commands, you can only attach the pronouns before the verb, or rather between no and the verb. I hope that makes sense. That's all for today. I know it's confusing, but it will get easier. Try to read as much as you can and make sure you read what you like. All the links are in the description. Ask me anything if you want. You're probably wondering now what's gonna happen if we combine both direct and indirect object pronouns together. And that's gonna be the topic for the next video. But before we do that, please make sure you understand how both of them work separately. That's gonna be very important. Thank you for watching.